Hello and welcome to the first in a new series of bite-sized videos about international relations and international relations theory. So the purpose of these short videos is to just give you a brief introduction, an overview of IR as an academic discipline, and an introduction to some of the fundamental basic points of IR theory. They are not intended, of course, to give you any in-depth coverage. If you would like more detailed information about IR theory, then I would encourage you to check out my more detailed series of lecture-style videos. But these short bite-sized videos are intended just to cover the very basics and act as a brief introduction to the discipline. So let's begin by talking briefly about international relations as an academic discipline and its origins. International politics has, of course, been studied and commented upon for many centuries, thousands of years in fact, but it's only really in the last just over 100 years or so that IR has been recognised as an academic discipline in its own right. The appointment of Sir Alfred Zimmern as the first professor of international politics at the University of Aberystwyth in Wales in 1919 is usually taken as the moment when IR became recognised as an academic discipline in its own right, as distinct from older disciplines such as history. International relations theory is very important to the study of IR because it is theory which gives us our conceptual framework for understanding. Without theory, we can look at world events, we can turn on the TV, we can log onto the internet, we can see lots of things happening in the world. But actually making sense of all this stuff is impossible without a conceptual framework, a framework of ideas which we can use to make sense of all of these events. And this is the purpose of international relations theory. However, there is not one single body of IR theory. There are in fact multiple competing paradigms on IR theory. And much of the debate and discussion within the discipline centres around debates between these proponents of these different theoretical paradigms. Now, IR theory has developed and evolved over time, and indeed the evolution and development of IR theory over the last century plus has reflected and in many ways defined the evolution of international relations itself as an academic discipline. For much of the history of IR as an academic discipline, the realist versus liberal debate has been central. The realist and liberal paradigms represent what I'm referring to as traditional IR theory, because those have been the mainstream paradigms, and the debate between them has dominated and defined the discipline for much of its history. However, in recent decades, and certainly since the end of the Cold War, we've also seen a group of completely different perspectives become much more mainstream. Perspectives which are critical of and fundamentally challenge some of the basic assumptions of traditional IR theory. These include neo-Marxist perspectives such as dependency and world systems theory, and also a whole group of I'm kind of lumping together several different paradigms under the heading reflectivist perspectives. These include constructivism, critical theory, and feminist perspectives. And I'm also on this channel going to produce a couple of videos taking a look at post-colonial and non-Western perspectives on IR as well. So all of these paradigms on IR will be explored in some detail in videos on this channel. So again, the two traditional international relations theoretical paradigms are known as realism and liberalism. And the debate between those two paradigms has dominated IR as a discipline for much of its history. Now, both realism and liberalism, the two traditional IR theoretical paradigms, are both what we call state-centric approaches, which means that they focus on the interactions of states, i.e. countries and their governments. They both see states as being the most important actors in the international system, and they're primarily concerned with explaining how the world works in terms of the interactions between nation states. Realism takes a quite pessimistic view of the world and argues that international politics is primarily about competition and conflict between states. To a realist, power is the only thing that matters. Realists believe that moral principles, values, norms, even things like international law ultimately don't change the basic reality of power politics. The world is a dangerous and conflictual place where power is the only thing that ultimately matters. Liberals take a much more optimistic view of the world, and particularly the prospects for nation states to collaborate and cooperate and ultimately to move towards a more peaceful, rules-based international order. So liberals tend to focus much more on opportunities for cooperation and for the prospects for building international institutions, building a rules-based international order. So again, the debate between these two perspectives has tended to dominate IR for much of its history. But again, both these traditional paradigms are focusing ultimately on states and their interactions. The critical perspectives on IR, which have become more prominent, particularly since the end of the Cold War, tend to start from some quite different assumptions compared to traditional realist and liberal perspectives. So the critical approaches tend not to focus on interactions between nation states. Instead, their primary focus is more on underlying economic and social forces, which are seen as the real drivers of international politics. States and their interactions are just seen as kind of surface manifestations of a bigger picture, a bigger set of underlying forces, economic and social forces, which are seen by the critical paradigms as the thing that we should really be focused on. So again, in this series of short videos, I'll start off by looking first of all at the traditional state-centric paradigms before moving on to explore some of these critical perspectives, such as dependency and world systems theory, constructivism, critical theory, feminism, and post-colonialism. So hopefully that's given you at least a brief taster of what IR and IR theory is all about. In the next couple of bite-sized videos, we'll start to look at the traditional IR theories of realism and liberalism and the debate between them.